Brian again with Walnut Farm Bees. Looking at the 10-day forecast, noticing we're going to get into some 60s and maybe 40s overnight here in south central PA, and I'm sure it's going to be cooler than that up in the northern areas of the state. So I wanted to just mention a few things about feeding any hives that where the colonies have not stored away enough for the winter, or you just want to make sure that they have a good weight as we go into fall, because I know there's a lot of varying information out there, and some might be afraid to feed the bees, worried that maybe they can only eat honey. And if you look at most of the recent research, you see that that's not the case. There's a lot of variety in capped honey, and especially as far as the nutritional quality and protein levels in those honey, because over the winter, if we have a cold snaps that last for weeks, bees cannot leave the colonies. Sometimes weeks are longer, and that means they cannot relieve themselves, which means if there's a lot of protein, it can impact their guts, and where you get dysentery and things like that going on inside of colonies. And plain sugar syrup, sucrose, tends to thin out that protein level and can sometimes be better than what the bees can pull in the fall. And it really varies based on your area, what kind of nectar is coming in right now, if anything. But at any rate, if you're going to feed the colonies, you could still be feeding a light syrup right now if you have comb to draw out. If you have drawn out combs, you can start feeding heavier syrup, and certainly as we get towards the beginning of October, you may want heavier than that, 2 to 1 or heavier. And by heavier, you might need a purchase product that, such as Man Lake's Pro Sweet, to be able to get even heavier syrup into any really light colonies. There are lots of different feeders out there for feeding syrup. Here's a standard frame feeder. This is a 1 gallon feeder. I think this one is from Man Lake. And there's lots of varieties of these. There are medium size if you're using mediums for your colonies. There are smaller and larger, up to 2 gallon frame feeders. Basically, they take the place of 1 or more frames inside of the colony, and you can pour the syrup straight in here. And most of them these days should have a float or a ladder. This is called a cap and ladder system, where essentially the bees are able to then hold on to the sides and not drown. I don't know that I've ever seen one of these where you had 0 drowning going on, but they work better than the older ones did. You can put this directly inside the colony, as I mentioned, and the benefit there is that it's going to warm it. It's going to prevent it from robbing and stuff like that. So it's good for that. One thing I don't like is that I have to open up a colony to check on whether they've consumed the syrup and to fill it up again. So you got the colony open while you're filling syrup, which can also attract robbing. If I really have to put weight on a colony, I use a bucket feeder. This is a 1 gallon bucket. You can go up to 2 gallons or more bucket, or even smaller buckets. I find this to be a nice size to put some weight on a colony. Basically, once you have a bucket, you don't want to keep opening the lid, or you'll eventually ruin the seal, because the idea behind it is as you flip it over with the syrup in, it'll form an airtight seal against this and just let a little bit of syrup out for the bees to eat. Now you notice there's a hole in the top. That's the feeder and the fill hole. There's a variety of different ways to go about this. These came from Better Bee. I like these, but I don't like these. They work really well for accessing the syrup, but they also occasionally will come out of despite a seal, come off the top of the lid, and then you'll have the occasional blowout where there's excess syrup running through the colony, which is not a good thing. If these work properly, these can really add weight very quickly, and there's no drowning involved. if you're going to use this, you need a lid that either has a hole on it for the bees to come out and feed, or put it over an inner cover with another box on the top and your lid on top of that. Probably a little bit better, these tint plugs, you want to make sure that you drill the correct hole size, which this one is not, for these tint plugs, and it will snap into that lid, and so it's not going to just accidentally fall out. And you pull it out when you're filling. You put your syrup right in here, and you would put a few pinholes in the top to let the syrup come out. Depending on how large the colony is, you might put more holes in there to increase the rate of feeding. And then again, you just flip this bucket over, put it on top of either the outside cover if you have a hole on the outside, or over the inside inner cover, and put a box around it and a lid on top of that. Again, these buckets are super easy to fill, and a great way to add a lot of weight to a hive very quickly. For another thing that I like, if you have either lids with a hole on them, mine all have a hole, or most of them have a hole about 70 millimeter, or the size of a standard canning jar lid, and it's just for convenience of feeding. They do make I believe Man Lake and Better Bee may make like a feeding board that goes on top. I'll post a link in the comments that allows you to put jars like this on top. But what I have here is the easiest one to find is a quart-sized jar, and of course you can use glass. I like plastic because they don't break. The Man Lake sells these, Dogwood Ridge Bees sell these. You can get the lid from any of those places, including Dayton has the lids as well, but does not have the container. This is a great way, again, to feed colonies. What I like about it, the two things I like about it. One, very easy to fill. I have holes in the top of my lids, as I mentioned, and I can easily see how much is left. For colonies that need more, this is a ½ gallon. This comes from Cutler Supply. It's really hard to find ½ gallon jars that take a standard canning lid size, and you can see the feeder there has little tiny holes there punched in it, which allows the bees to come up and get that syrup. So this is a nice jar for adding even more, and you can visibly see the level of the syrup as well. As far as syrup goes, if you're using something heavy late in the fall or upcoming few weeks, like Pro Sweet, that tends to be fairly shelf stable because of the quantity of sugar in there. So it's not as much an issue with that. But if you're making your own 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 syrup, what you might find, this jar doesn't show it as much, you can see a little bit of mold there starting at the top. You might find that you'll end up with issues where it may mold quickly. So some people will add a little bit of apple cider vinegar, or a tiny bit of bleach or something like that to their tank where they're mixing, or their container they're mixing the syrup to keep it from molding. Others might add something like Honeybee Healthy, or I'm trying to think, there's a new product out there, Hive Alive, something like that, which may also keep it from molding. Got to watch with those products that have stimulants in them, because you don't want to attract robbing. If this container is working well and sitting on top of my colony, it fits exactly in the hole I've got there, and so robbing is not an issue unless something would be leaking, and I have 0 drowning going on. And it's a great way to put weight on colonies that need more weight before we get closer to winter. So hopefully your mites are taken care of at this point in the year, and you're looking at the health of your colonies, and specifically nutrition and weight as they go into winter, so that nice colony size with plenty of weight, so that they successfully make it through the winter to spring.